In the year 121 of the 31st millennium, during the final days of the Great Scouring, Roboute Guilliman assembled the Ultramarines and 6 of its successor chapters to pursue and eliminate the demon Primarch Fulgrim and his Emperor's Children Legion once and for all. At the world of Thessaly, Fulgrim set a trap for the Ultramarines' fleet, nearly reversing the roles of hunter and prey. Guilliman organized a small elite strike force and teleported aboard the Emperor's Children flagship, Pride of the Emperor, with the intent to end the demon Primarch. Guilliman entered the ship's corrupted Heliopolis alone, where he soon faced Fulgrim, who attempted to convince Guilliman to embrace the worship of the Chaos Gods, as he had done. Guilliman refused, and the two Primarchs clashed. However, it quickly became evident that Guilliman was no match for Fulgrim's warp-enhanced strength and sinuous new demonic form. Realizing he was about to be defeated, Guilliman called for aid from his Ultramarines. As their forces entered the Heliopolis, Fulgrim summoned a horde of Emperor's children who had been waiting nearby. As their gene-sons battled around them, the two Primarchs clashed again, but Fulgrim ultimately emerged victorious, slitting Guilliman's throat with his poisoned sword. A shocked Guilliman asked Fulgrim how he had managed to inflict a fatal wound. Fulgrim replied that his warp-infused eyes had seen the scar left by Cor Phaeron's Athame during the Battle of Calth. Guilliman collapsed unconscious, but was teleported back to safety aboard the Ultramarine flagship Gauntlet of Power, along with the surviving Ultramarines of the First and Second Companies. He was placed in a stasis field for the journey back to Macragge. In the aftermath, the Emperor's Children massacred Guilliman's fleet, with the Gauntlet of Power being one of the few Loyalist warships that escaped. Once on Macragge, the Shrine of the Primarch was constructed to contain Guilliman's body frozen in time, becoming one of the most holy places in the entire Imperium, attracting millions of pilgrims to Macragge every Terran year before the Primarch's resurrection. The Shrine of the Primarch lay within the Temple of Correction, a vaulted sepulchre forming a small part of the Ultramarines' vast northern polar fortress on Macragge. The temple is a marvel of construction, reflecting the attention to detail that defines every Ultramarine's endeavour. Its proportions defy the human mind with their scope and grandeur. The multicoloured glass dome forming its roof is the largest of its kind. Even the techno-magi of the Adeptus Mechanicus come to marvel at the structure, said to have been designed by Roboute Guilliman himself. According to the Ultramarines, there is enough marble within the temple to build a mountain, and sufficient amounts of adamantium and plasteel were used in its construction to build an imperial war fleet capable of defending an entire sector. Within this edifice was the great marble throne of Roboute Guilliman, and upon that throne sat his still regal body. Though 10,000 standard years passed following the Battle of Thessaly, the Primarch's body was perfectly preserved by the stasis field. Even his death wounds from Fulgrim's blade remained visible on his throat. His mortal remains were preserved from the ravages of time by a stasis field that isolated the Primarch from the passage of normal, four-dimensional space-time. Everything encompassed by the field was trapped in time and could neither change nor decay. Some among the more extreme devotees of the imperial cult claimed that the Primarch's wounds were slowly healing, showing mysterious signs of recovery. Others denied this, pointing out the scientific impossibility of any form of change occurring within a stasis field. Yet enough chose to believe the stories to come and witness for themselves the supposed miracle of the Primarch, generation after generation. Hope, as Roboute Guilliman well knew, is truly the most powerful force in the universe. We commend our souls to the Emperor. Let the story of our sacrifice burn across history like a shooting star, for death and for glory, for the Ultramarines. Lucien Ventris, Ultramarines Terminator Sergeant. Over the 10 Terran millennia following the loss of Roboute Guilliman, Ultramar withstood countless invasions, some so bizarre they defied the common man's understanding. The Ultramarines clashed with Orc wars, renegade uprisings, Tau incursions and Necron raids. Yet their heroism shone brightest in battles defending the galaxy itself from threats beyond known space. In the 35th millennium, the sons of Ultramar proved their might against the Star Striders of Kreoth and retaliated for the Heavenfall massacres. However, the conflict that stands above all others is the onslaught of the Tyrannid Hive Fleet Behemoth and the Battle of Macragge in the 745th year of 41st millennium. Upon learning of the threat posed by Hive Fleet Behemoth from Inquisitor Fidus Cryptman, Chapter Master Marnius Calgar immediately devised a plan. Believing Macragge to be the most imminent target, Calgar ordered the planet's already formidable defences to be further strengthened. A dozen warships orbited Macragge, and more arrived daily from the warp. Massive strike cruisers overshadowed civilian vessels and Navis Imperialis destroyers, themselves dwarfed by the imposing Ultramarines' battle barges. Between this formidable fleet and the planet's powerful orbital defence stations, Macragge was well defended. A few solar weeks later, the Tyrannid Hive Fleet's Outrider vessels attacked. The alien bioships overwhelmed the Ultramarine strike cruisers and descended upon the planet. Thousands of mycetic spore-birthed bioforms soon rampaged across Macragge. Recognizing that the Tyrannid threat was too vast to be countered piecemeal, Calgar consolidated his ground forces into 3 mighty armies. The primary and secondary task forces, mainly composed of Ultramarines, First Company veterans and Ultramarian planetary defence forces of the Ultramar Auxilia, fortified Macragge's polar fortresses against the Tyrannid onslaught. Meanwhile, Calgar's task force, the largest, conducted a series of rearguard actions to slow the Tyrannid advance and eliminate hive mind synapse control organisms. Calgar achieved significant early success, buying time with blood for his battle brothers to the north and south. However, the Tyrannids kept advancing. In a climactic battle on Cold Steel Ridge, the Ultramarines' rearguard was devastated by the Tyrannid horde, and Calgar himself was gravely wounded. Realizing that remaining planetside would lead to a wasteful death, Calgar withdrew to the orbiting battle barge Octavius. Refusing all but essential Medicae attention, the Master of Macragge took command of the fleet and sought a way to save his world from certain destruction. Hours later, the main Tyrannid Hive fleet arrived at Macragge. With no reinforcements in sight, Calgar led his fleet in daring attacks, targeting isolated vessels as they spread out to invade Macragge. Trapped between the formidable firepower of Macragge's polar fortresses and Calgar's relentless fleet, Tyrannid vessels were destroyed by the score, but many more remained. As the battle raged, the Tyrannids unleashed thousands of mycetic spores above the vital polar fortresses. If these were taken, Macragge's guns would fall silent, leaving the world defenseless. Thus, the Tyrannids landed in greater numbers, and the fortresses were besieged. After delivering their gruesome cargo, the battered hive ships retreated from orbit. Trusting his Ultramarines to defend the fortresses, Calgar relentlessly pursued the Tyrannid fleet, determined to prevent further ruin to other worlds. Never before or since has the valour of the Ultramarines been tested as in the defence of the polar fortresses. The veteran Space Marines of the First Company led the lightly armed Ultramar Auxilia in a tenacious defence, holding every wall and trench until the last possible moment before being overrun by the Tyrannid swarm. Slowly, the Imperial troops retreated deeper into the fortress, exacting a heavy toll on the advancing Tyrannids for every metre they gained. The Titans of the Legio Praetor stalked the ice fields, carving smoking furrows through the onrushing Tyrannid hordes with shells and plasma. The ferocity of the swarms was beyond belief. At the northern polar fortress, they overran the walls by using the steaming piles of their own dead for cover. Imperial battle titans were dragged down and torn apart by sheer weight of numbers. The defenders' gun barrels glowed red-hot and jammed despite the Arctic cold, and ammunition began to run low even though the fortress had stockpiles intended to last for months of siege. Yet still the defenders fought on. Lumbering, scythe-armed carnifexes tore into the defenders' bastions like living battering rams, smashing through metal and rockcrete walls with equal fury. The Ultramarines relied on heavy, short-range firepower to bring down the foe, but for each Tyrannid that fell, another 3 sprang forward. Lesser troops were paralyzed with terror as the Tyranids repeatedly breached the perimeter, but the Ultramarines never despaired and never considered defeat. Calgar pursued the Tyranid fleet towards the ringed world of Circe at the edge of the Macragga system. The timely arrival of the Armada Imperialis's battle fleet, Tempestus from Bacca, finally sealed the Tyranids' fate by catching them in a vice between the two fleets. Even then, the Imperial fleet was overmatched, as the Tyranids were too numerous. The battle would have been lost if not for the heroic sacrifice of the battleship Dominus Astra. Charging into the heart of the Hive fleet, the massive Emperor-class battleship detonated its warp drive, creating a warp vortex that dragged both it and the entire Tyranid Hive fleet to oblivion. With the bulk of the Hive fleet destroyed, Calgar's surviving starships returned to Macragge to try to save the polar garrisons. The survivors of the Ultramarines' First Company were believed to be fighting among the defense laser silos of the northern citadel, but all contact with them had been lost after the Tyranids overran the surface outposts. Nothing was known of the southern polar garrison. Sensing the situation was critical, Calgar sent the 3rd and 7th Companies of the Ultramarines ahead in their fast-strike cruisers, while his remaining damaged void ships limped back to Macragge. The Space Marines of the 3rd and 7th Companies deployed to the poles by drop pod, with supporting units following in Thunderhawk gunships. Scenes of unimaginable carnage awaited them below. Piles of mangled Tyranid corpses and shattered war gear lay strewn across the ice. Vast, steaming craters pocked the snows where Titan plasma reactors had gone critical. The stench of death permeated the air. The 7th Company landed unopposed at the southern polar fortress and quickly linked up with the survivors of the garrison above ground. Together, they pushed on to clear the subterranean passages overrun by the Tyranids. Devastator squads kept the alien swarm at bay until Thunderhawk gunships arrived to blast the Tyranids back into the darkness. Captain Michael Fabian of the 3rd Company prudently awaited the arrival of the company's 3 dreadnoughts before proceeding into the fortress itself to search for survivors. The dark, dank corridors beneath the northern polar fortress had already been altered by the Xenos presence. Mucus dripped from the walls and ceilings, and a pervasive, musky stench filled the air. Alien screams and roars echoed along the tunnels. The Space Marines pushed onward into corridors littered with Tyranid and Ultramarine dead, the darkness receding reluctantly before the lights of their power armor. Chameleoid lictors lay in ambush among the defenders' corpses, slashing into the advancing squads in an orgy of destruction. Eventually, the forward squads used flamers to burn their way along the passages and flush out their enemies. Even as fire consumed them, the Tyranid creatures leapt forward with claws outstretched to rend and slay. Through darkness and unimaginable terrors, the 3rd Company finally reached the lower penetorium, where the defenders had made their last stand. Tyranid bodies were piled deep around the doors, and within the room a circle of Terminators lay where they had fought back to back. Each had given his life for his brothers. The Ultramarines' First Company had been wiped out, to the last man. The Battle of Macragge remains a source of both sorrow and pride for the Ultramarines. The names of its fallen are commemorated each year at the Feast of Days, their sacrifice remembered throughout Ultramar with honour and gratitude. But the cost had been great. The Ultramarines' First Company was gone, and the 3rd and 7th sorely diminished. It would be many long years before the chapter could properly replace its losses, but replace them it would. The Ultramarines would endure. Since the Battle of Macragga, the Ultramarines have become instrumental in the Imperium's wars against other Tyranid Hive fleets. In response to the threat, and counter to the dictates of the Codex Astartes for the first time, the survivors of the Battle of Macragge were formed into elite, specially trained anti-Tyranid squads. These so-called tyrannic war veterans make up the first and most powerful of the chapter's reformed elite First Company, and are second to no other warriors of the Imperium because of their experience, training and upgraded power armor. The Ultramarines have always defended the eastern fringes of the galaxy within the vast Ultima Segmentum, standing as a bulwark against the forces of darkness emanating from beyond the halo stars. The chapter's 4th Company harbours a particular animosity toward the savage Xenos known as the Tyranids. These rapacious extragalactic predators are relentless alien killers that consume everything in their path to feed the ever-hungry biological factories of their Norn queens. The first Tyranid hive fleet, codenamed Behemoth, crashed into Imperial space in 745th year of the 41st millennium and unleashed its fury upon Macragge with talon and claw. Informed of the impending Xenos threat by Inquisitor Kryptman, the chapter master of the Ultramarines Marneus Calgar prepared to face the deadly aliens. However, nothing could truly prepare his warriors for the sheer horror that awaited them. Under the command of Captain Idaeus, the Fourth Company stood at the forefront of the invasion and played a crucial role in destroying several of the larger Tyranid vessels. Ultimately, Hive Fleet Behemoth's invasion was repelled, but the victory came at a terrible cost. The entire Ultramarines veteran First Company was annihilated defending Macragge's northern polar defences, and many Astartes heroes met their end. Though the Ultramarines had won the First Tyrannic War, Kryptman warned Calgar that the Tyranids would return. Following the destruction of Hive Fleet Behemoth, the Ultramarines focused on consolidating their hold over the interstellar realm of Ultramar. Many of their finest warriors had fallen to the Tyranids, and their depleted strength invited alien and piratical raiders to exploit this temporary lapse in security, launching their own raids throughout Ultramar to plunder previously impregnable worlds. Thus, the Fourth Company, at full strength when the Tyranid fleet attacked, had suffered the fewest casualties and was the first to be called upon to help liberate Vaughn's world, a shrine world of the Ecclesiarchy in a neighbouring subsector. The Orc warlord, known as the Archmaniac of Cabela, had seized Vaughn's world, enslaving its population and desecrating the holy temples of the Emperor. Such barbarity could not be tolerated on such a sacred world, and thus the Fourth Company was tasked with its liberation. Captain Idaeus once more led his warriors into battle, employing a combination of strict adherence to the Codex Astartes and an uncanny ability to adapt to rapidly changing battlefield conditions. This strategy enabled the Ultramarines to bypass many Orc strongpoints and dismantle critical elements of their defences. With the Orcs preoccupied with hunting down the Space Marine raiders, they were unable to repel the massed tank companies and regiments of the Astra Militarum's Jovian Hussars, who overwhelmed the Greenskins with unusually low casualties. During the cleansing of Vaughn's world, a young space marine named Uriel Ventris first caught Idaeus's attention. A descendant of the legendary Lucian Ventris, who had perished fighting the Tyranids of Hive Fleet Behemoth beneath the polar defence fortress 180 years earlier, Uriel demonstrated exemplary courage, even among warriors for whom heroic feats were commonplace. Taking command of his squad after his sergeant was killed by an Orc warlord, Uriel exhibited the qualities that would one day lead him to command the Fourth Company himself. With the liberation of Vaughn's world complete, the next mission was to secure the borders of Ultramar. Upon their return from the successful campaign against the Orcs, Idaeus's company joined their battle brothers in fortifying Ultramar's borders against further attacks. For the next 5 standard years, the company patrolled the northern boundaries of their realm, conducting interdiction attacks and boarding actions against all encountered raiders. Aboard the Vi Victus, an esteemed strike cruiser commanded by Captain Laszlo Tiberius, a scarred veteran of the Tyrannic Wars, the Fourth Company destroyed over 300 enemy vessels, achieving the highest number of kills to be added to their company chapel banner. Over the following years, punctuated by occasional returns to Macragge for obeisances at the Temple of Correction, where the stasis-sealed, mortally wounded form of Primarch Roboute Guilliman watches over his chapter, the Fourth Company regained its strength and inducted many new members. Once back to full combat readiness, the company was deemed fit for duties beyond the borders of Ultramar. In the Marineus Corps, they earned the gratitude of the Adeptus Mechanicus by boarding and destroying the space hulk Flame of Iniquity, an agglomeration of derelict starships that threatened several Forge worlds, the giant factory planets where much of the Imperium's armed might is produced. Following this success, the determination and courage of the Fourth Company caught the attention of Inquisitor Markov, who required warriors of such skill. He petitioned Marneus Calga for the Ultramarines' assistance in a matter of grave urgency. Calga consented, and the Fourth Company was seconded to the Inquisition service, dispatched to the world of Epsilon Regalis, a world later made infamous by the witch hunter Tyrus. What transpired on Epsilon Regalis remains unknown, as the events following the Ultramarines' deployment there were sealed by the order of the Ordo Hereticus. Immediately after this mysterious mission, the Fourth Company was involved in eradicating several indigenous lifeforms on the world of Haranveth to facilitate colonization by an Adeptus Mechanicus Explorator team. Many Ultramarines felt this type of combat was beneath them, but none dared defy their chapter master's decree. Following the purgation of Haranveth, the company was recalled to participate in the Balur Crusade, a mixed chapter force led by Marneus Calga himself. A coalition of Xenos creatures, identified as the Tau, Kroot and Terrellians, had launched an attack into Imperial-held space, demanding that the inhabitants of the captured worlds swear allegiance to their blasphemous empire. Such aggression could not go unanswered. Calgar led a combined Space Marine army, including warriors from the Ultramarines, Blood Angels, Marines Malevolent, and the remnants of the Scythes of the Emperor chapter, to swift victory, destroying the nascent Xenos colonies and re-establishing Imperial rule. The Fourth Company faced the Tyranids once again on the world of Ekar 4, when the Tyranids returned with Hive Fleet Kraken. Unlike the battering ram approach of Hive Fleet Behemoth, Kraken attacked in a series of smaller yet equally lethal splinter fleets, advancing across a much wider front. Many of these fleets were destroyed, forcing the Tyranids to consolidate their attack on the industrial world of Ekar 4. Once more, the Ultramarines met the Tyranid threat with courage and steel, fighting alongside hundreds of Imperial Guard regiments and elements from 7 other Space Marine chapters. The Fourth Company once again led the battle, with Idaeus and Uriel both receiving the Imperial laurel for their bravery. The alien forces were repelled once more, but the threat of Hive Fleet Kraken persisted. The Tyranid fleet fragmented into several smaller fleets as it retreated from Ekar 4, with many of these splinter fleets reaching deep into the galactic core. Some even made it as far as the Segmentum Solar, where the Imperial fleet's overwhelming firepower destroyed them mercilessly. However, it remains uncertain whether all these Kraken splinter fleets have been completely eradicated. After defeating the Tyranids at Ekar 4, the Fourth Company was sent to Thracia, where the rumoured presence of Night Lord's Chaos Space Marines required a force capable of engaging them in close combat. Imperial Guard regiments advanced toward the planetary capital, facing stiff resistance but ultimately crushing all opposition. As the campaign advanced, the Imperial lines became overstretched and vulnerable to flanking attacks. Recognizing this, the Fourth Company targeted the bridges that could facilitate such attacks, but in doing so, Captain Idaeus heroically sacrificed his life to destroy the final bridge. Mourning his loss, the Fourth Company returned to Macragga, where veteran Sergeant Uriel Ventris was promoted to captain and took command of the company. With Captain Ventris newly appointed, the Fourth Company embarked on their latest mission, to escort Adept Barzano of the Administratum to the troubled world of Pavonis. Located on the eastern fringes, Pavonis was beset by pirate raids and civil unrest, and upon the Ultramarines' arrival, the planet was on the brink of a bloody civil war between competing industrial cartels. Captain Ventris and Adept Barzano, who was later revealed to be an inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos, discovered that the planet's turmoil was instigated by a madman named Casimir de Valtos. He sought to release an ancient and powerful Catan star god, imprisoned beneath Pavonis for tens of millions of years. De Valtos was ultimately defeated, but the ancient entity known as the Nightbringer was freed from its long slumber and set loose among the stars. Only time will reveal the consequences of its escape for the Ultramarines and the galaxy. With peace and Imperial rule restored on Pavonis, the Fourth Company travelled to the northern reaches of Segmentum Tempestus to Tarsis Ultra, a world brought into the Imperium by Guilliman during the early days of the Great Crusade, and one with a proud tradition of upholding Ultramarines' values. Ancient oaths of brotherhood tied the fate of Tarsis Ultra to the Ultramarines, and when a colossal space hulk drifted into the system, Captain Ventris led his men deep into its haunted depths to destroy it from within. Inside, the Ultramarines encountered nests of frenzied orcs and something far worse, Genestealers. The battle within the hulk was among the fiercest the Fourth Company had faced, but they fought their way out and watched its destruction from the bridge of the Valle Victus. However, their victory was overshadowed by dread, as the Astartes vessel's astropaths detected the forward edge of a bow wave of warp interference, known as the Shadow in the Warp, indicating the approach of the Tyranids once more. Upon receiving warning of the approaching Tyrannid Hive Fleet Leviathan, the Imperial response was swift. The Ultramarines contacted a brother chapter of Space Marines, the Mortifactors, who had significantly diverged from Reboot Guilliman's ideals, embracing a culture of death worship. A fleet was assembled led by Imperial Navy Admiral Bregon de Court aboard the battleship Argus, including many ancient and noble warships such as the Sword of Retribution and the Carlos Vincennes. Imperial Guard soldiers from the Death Corps of Krieg and the Logris regiments were deployed, and the local planetary defense forces received training from Sergeant Learchus, using the methods of the Ultramarine training barracks. Inquisitor Lord Kryptman once again contributed his expertise to the defense of Tarsis Ultra and brought an elite Death Watch Space Marines kill team led by the renowned Watch Captain Bannon. Given the time available, Tarsis Ultra was made as secure as possible. The battle commenced in the outer reaches of the system, and although the world of Barbarous Prime was lost to the Tyranids, the initial elements of their fleet were defeated. However, the Hive fleet's advance couldn't be halted, and Kryptman had to sacrifice the world of Cordalis, ordering the Mortifactors to virus bomb it from orbit before the Tyranids could assimilate its biomass. Despite tensions among the Imperial commanders, the Tyranid threat was faced with courage and honor on Tarsis Ultra's surface, though the defenders struggled against the relentless alien assaults. Although many lives were lost and a significant portion of the Fourth Company perished, the Tyranids were ultimately defeated. Captain Ventris, defying the teachings of the Codex Astartes, took command of the Death Watch kill team and led a desperate mission to deliver a lethal gene poison to the heart of the last remaining Hive ship. Having previously served with the Death Watch, Captain Ventris knew this was where he could make the greatest impact. Despite veteran Sergeant Learchus's warning that Marneus Calgar would learn of his deviation from the Codex, Ventris embarked on the mission. Braving alien horrors and biological threats, the Death Watch Space Marines and Captain Ventris succeeded in administering the gene poison to the Tyranid Norn Queen. The Norn Queen's death throes, caused by uncontrollable mutation, drove the connected Tyrannid organisms into feral self-destruction. The Tyrannids were defeated, but like Icar IV, the taint of the alien invasion would forever mar the surface of Tarsis Ultra and the souls of its surviving inhabitants. With Tarsis Ultra secured, the Fourth Company collected their dead and returned to Macragge, burdened by the cost of honouring their ancient debt. However, a greater challenge awaited them. Allegations of heresy against Uriel Ventris for his actions on Tarsis Ultra threatened to strip the company of its honour. Instead of the expected execution for breaching ultramarine doctrine, Captain Ventris was given a death oath by Marneus Calgar. He and his faithful companion, Sergeant Pausanias Lisan, were tasked with seeking out a place of dark iron where twisted reflections of the Space Marines were being created. Shortly after leaving Macragge, Ventris's starship was attacked by warp entities controlled by a demon imprisoned inside a demon engine called the Omphalos Demonium. This demon engine, resembling a huge, grotesque steam locomotive, could travel between the warp and real space. The two Space Marines were captured and taken deep within the Eye of Terror to Medrengard, the demon world home of the Iron Warriors' traitor Marines. There, they joined forces with a band of renegade Space Marines and two surviving former Imperial Guardsmen, who were escaped slaves of the Iron Warriors. The group transformed into a self-proclaimed guerrilla band, conducting hit-and-run attacks against the Iron Warriors. Ventris, Pausanias, and the guerrillas were eventually captured by warsmith Honsu of the Iron Warriors. After defying him, Ventress was implanted into the womb of a Demonculaba, a genetically modified woman, whose womb had been enhanced with Imperial Fist's gene seed stolen by the Iron Warriors during the 13th Black Crusade from Hydra Caudatus. This was intended to turn normal adolescents into new Chaos Space Marines. This perverse technology accelerated the development of new traitor Marines in the labs beneath Honsu's fortress. These new Chaos Space Marines were meant to replenish the ranks of the Iron Warriors Legion, which had been unable to replace its losses over the 10 millennia since the Horus Heresy. The Demonculaba were also the mutated creatures Uriel and Pausanias had been assigned to destroy. Simultaneously, Honsu faced a siege by rival Iron Hands warsmiths for refusing to share their portion of the untainted Imperial Fist's gene stock, taken after the invasion of an Imperial facility on Hydra Caudatus. Amidst the fighting, Ventress and Pausanias managed to escape and destroyed Honsu's labs and fortress, but to achieve this they had to release a captive Cornat demon prince. The demon prince then obliterated the rival demon it had previously imprisoned in the Omphalos Daemonium, demolished Honsu's fortress and minions, and attacked Honsu's rivals, driving them away. Later, Uriel Pausanias and a group of the Unfleshed, the mutant rejects of the Iron Warriors' experiments to create new Space Marines using the Demonculaba, escaped from the Eye of Terror on the Omphalos Daemonium, which had reverted to a regular starship. The former demon engine transported them through the warp to a troubled world called Selinus, specifically to a forbidden zone on the planet's surface that reeked of death. Ventress and Pausanias were confronted by the veteran Imperial Guard regiment, ruling the planet as a gift of conquest, and the suspicious and ruthless planetary governor, the regiment's ex-commander. They requested assistance in reaching Macragge, but their astropathic transmission was intercepted by the Grey Knights, who were monitoring Selinus for other reasons. A squad of Grey Knights arrived, arrested Ventress and Pausanias, and after rigorous physical, mental and spiritual trials, declared them untainted by their exposure to chaos on Medrengard. Meanwhile, it was revealed that a powerful psyker had likely brought the Omphalos Daemonium to Selinus to use the freed Unfleshed for revenge against the governor and his former regiment. This was retribution for the regiment's murder of tens of thousands of civilians, including the entire population of a town that was the birthplace of many leaders of a small guerrilla campaign now operating on Selinus. The campaign itself was caused by the Imperial Governor's brutality and heavy-handedness. The ravaged town was the forbidden zone where the Ultramarines first arrived on Selinus. After being possessed by the Psyker, the Unfleshed went on a killing spree, but they were eventually killed by Uriel, Pausanias and the Grey Knights, who then returned the Ultramarines to Macragge. Having completed their death oath successfully, Uriel and Pausanias were welcomed back to their chapter's homeworld, but underwent interrogation and tests by the chief librarian to ensure they were not tainted by their time on the demon world of Medrengard. After Uriel and Pausanias were declared free of Chaos Taint, Uriel was reinstated as captain of the Ultramarines' 4th Company and given the chance to prove himself by defending Pavonis from Tau invaders. Pausanias, however, faced demotion and was subjected to 100 solar days of isolation from the chapter as punishment for concealing the unusual regenerative abilities of his bionic arm. This arm, obtained after the Catan Nightbringer severed his biological arm during an earlier mission to Pavonis, had become infused with the Necron's living metal, necrodermis, due to contact with the Catan. After serving his time, Pausanias was reinstated as a battle brother of the 4th Company and rejoined Uriel. Meanwhile, Warsmith Honsu, consumed by hatred for Ventress and the Ultramarines following the events on Medrengard, devised a plan to annihilate them, especially targeting Uriel Ventress. As bait, he used a stolen Mechanicus virus to turn Tarsis Ultra, a world protected by the Ultramarines, into a dead world. Honsu assembled a large invasion force comprising his Iron Warrior warband, Chaos Cultists, Traitor Marines and Traitor Guardsmen, Drukhari pirates, Kroot and other alien and human mercenaries, a dark Mechanicum force led by traitor Magos Sikarin, and numerous criminals, psychopaths and killers. Honshu discovered and boarded a star fort hidden in uncharted space in the Ultramar subsector for the past 60 years, guarded by an Ultramarines contingent. He slaughtered the star fort's garrison and freed the powerful demon Prince Makar, secretly held captive within the fort. Makar, once the word-bearer's dark apostle Malok Cartho, who attacked Ultramar during the Horus heresy, was imprisoned by Marneus Calga, the Ultramarines chapter master, with the Inquisition's help. Makar, hating the Ultramarines and the Imperium, aligned with Honshu, possessing a desecrated Ultramarine dreadnought shell to interact with the material universe. He transformed the Star Fort into a chaos abomination linked to the warp and summoned a massive demon army to attack the realm of Ultramar. Honshu had also acquired a clone of Uriel Ventris, known as the Newborn, created from Uriel's genetic material left behind while in the womb of the Demonculaba on Medrengard. The Newborn, a psychic and physical clone of Uriel, had fragments of Uriel's knowledge and memories, including Ultramar's defense protocols, which Honshu used to attack the Star Fort and then the entire realm of Ultramar. The whole chapter rose in defense, aided by an Adeptus Mechanicus contingent under Magos Locard, the warband of system-based Ordo Malleus Inquisitor Suzaku, a squad of Ravengard Space Marines, mobilized Ultramar Planetary Defense Force regiments and many civilians. The war spread across several Ultramar worlds, at least one of which was destroyed. Finally, Uriel confronted the Newborn and Honshu on Kalth, his birthplace. Honshu went there at Makar's request to the tomb of Remus Ventanus, an ancient Ultramarine hero of the Fourth Company known as the Saviour of Kalth, to destroy Ventanus's sarcophagus and war gear. Uriel killed the Newborn using a blade from Ventanus's war gear, and in the ensuing battle, Honshu's larger force was defeated thanks to the sudden appearance of spectral Guardian warriors. Faced with capture or death, Honshu detonated explosives placed around the tomb, collapsing it on himself and his opponents. Uriel and some of his fellow warriors survived and headed to Talasar, an Ultramar world where Makar and his demon army were close to overrunning Chapter Master Calga and his dwindling forces. Uriel and reinforcements arrived during the final battle for the world. Ventris tossed the powerful anti-demonic blade of Ventanus to Calga, who used it to annihilate Makar completely. With the demon army and Honshu's forces defeated in all theatres of the war, the Imperial forces engaged in mopping up operations, and within 6 months, the realm of Ultramar was declared free of chaos. Ominously, despite a thorough search of the ruins of the tomb of Ventanus, Warsmith Honshu's body was never recovered. Soon after the Iron Warriors' invasion of Ultramar was repelled in the 999th year of the 41st millennium, Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade began in full force. Following the fall of Cadia, the Despoiler received alarming news from the Chaos sorcerer Zaraphiston. Through his warp scryings, Zaraphiston discovered that Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call had escaped Cadia's destruction with a device capable of turning the tide of the Long War in favor of the Imperium of Man. The Despoiler also learned that Call was among several survivors from Cadia, now calling themselves the Celestinian Crusade, who had escaped into the webway with the help of the Aldari Inari and were heading towards Macraga, the Ultramarines' homeworld. To counter this emerging threat to his impending victory over the Corpse Emperor, the Despoiler dispatched part of his Black Fleet and ordered a chaos invasion of the realm of Ultramar as part of the 13th Black Crusade. The Celestinian Crusade, named after Saint Celestine, the living saint who aided Cadia's defenders in their darkest hour, was led by Celestine herself, Archmagos Cole, Marshal Marius Amalric of the Black Templars, and Inquisitor Caterina Greyfax of the Ordo Hereticus. Accompanied by Inari commanders Ivrain, the Daughter of Shades, and her war leader, the Vizarch, they emerged from the webway onto the shrine world of Laphis in the Macraga system. They were surprised to find themselves in a war zone, but quickly defeated the local chaos forces near the webway portal. The Celestinians and their uneasy Eldari allies overcame the Helldrakes besieging the local Ultramarines fortress and convinced the Space Marines to grant them passage to Macragge. Yvraine and the Vizarch sent most of the Inari back into the webway for other urgent missions. The Celestinians arrived at Macragge aboard an Ultramarines strike cruiser, discovering that the capital world of Ultramar was under a full-scale Chaos invasion. While a massive space battle raged between Chaos and Loyalist fleets, on the ground the fortress of Hera, the Ultramarines' fortress monastery, was at risk of falling to the arch-enemy. Securing an audience with Marneus Calgar, the chapter master of the Ultramarines and Lord of Macragge, Belisarius Cawl revealed his true age of over 10,000 standard years and his acquaintance with the Ultramarines Primarch Roboute Guilliman during the Horus Heresy. Cawl explained that Guilliman had tasked him with finding a way to restore the Primarch to life even before his mortal wounding by the demon Primarch Fulgrim after the Heresy. After intense debate, the Celestinians and the Inari were allowed into the Temple of Correction, where Guilliman sat in stasis, despite Chapter Master Calgar's reservations about the newcomers. As Cawl began his work on the time-frozen body of Guilliman seated upon his throne, the Black Legion noticed the activity and launched a massive assault on the Temple of Corrections, fearing what the Loyalists were attempting. The Celestinians, supported by Ultramarines officers, and the Third Brotherhood of the Grey Knights, led by Grand Master Aldric Voldus, who had come to Macragge to assist in its defence, faced over 100 Black Legionaries. Despite the Loyalists' efforts to buy Cawl just one more solar second to complete his work, more Chaos forces poured into the shrine from above using Dreadclaw assault boats, quickly overwhelming the defenders. In the final moments, Yvraine invoked the power of her patron Inead, the recently awakened Eldari god of the dead. The god's power over life and death, combined with Cawl's arcane technology, healed the Primarch's wound and awakened him from his 10,000-year slumber. Cawl had brought a reliquary from Mars, containing a unique suit of power armor, the Armor of Fate. Augmented by Eldari soul sorcery, this incredible armor captured and restored Guilliman's soul before it could flee beyond the veil. The foul poisons that Fulgrim had injected into his brother's bloodstream were finally cleansed, bringing Roboute Guilliman back to life. Cursed to wear his ornate armor forever due to its soul-sustaining technologies, Guilliman was resurrected in the Imperium's hour of greatest need, which had to suffice. An awakened and enraged Primarch was more than the Chaos attackers could handle. Guilliman shattered the Chaos forces and provided a significant morale boost for his Ultramarines and the other Loyalist forces. The Imperials swiftly swept aside the Black Legion, breaking the back of the Chaos assault on the Ultramarines' fortress monastery. In that moment of resurrection, the fate of Macragge and all of Ultramar was sealed. Following the battle in the Temple of Correction, Guilliman was crowned as the restored Primarch of the Ultramarines chapter and all its successor chapters, as well as the Lord of Macragge and ruler of Ultramar. Marneus Calgar gladly ceded the role of chapter leadership to his gene father. Guilliman declared that the autonomy of all the worlds that had once belonged to the realm of Ultramar and had gone their separate ways since the Horus Heresy was revoked. Ultramar was to be restored to its golden age as a miniature stellar empire of 500 human-settled worlds. Once in full control of the Loyalist forces on Macragge, the Primarch's strategic genius was unleashed, driving the forces of Chaos off Macragge and most of Ultramar within approximately 7 solar months. With Ultramar momentarily secure, Guilliman decided it was time to journey to Terra and meet his father, the Emperor, for the first time in 10 millennia. Gathering forces from across the Imperium that could reach Macragge as the warp grew increasingly turbulent in the wake of the 13th Black Crusade, the Primarch assembled a massive Imperial Crusade fleet to reach Terra. Leaving Macragge and Ultramar in the capable hands of Marneus Calgar, Guilliman's fleet was intercepted near the Great Warp Rift known as the Maelstrom by a Chaos fleet led by the demon Primarch Magnus the Red and his Thousand Sons Traitor Legion. Magnus had recently stirred from the planet of the Sorcerers to assault the Fenris system of his ancient foes, the Space Wolves, and now sought to confront his former brother. The Thousand Suns Primarch cast a potent sorcerous ritual that flung the Terran Crusade fleet into the Maelstrom with no apparent way to escape from the labyrinthine clutches of that warp rift. With time in the warp being indeterminate, the Terran Crusade wandered from demon world to demon world, taking steady casualties from constant demonic assaults. During this period, Roboute Guilliman's guilt and frustration grew, weighing down his psyche as the Loyalists found it impossible to escape the Maelstrom. A beacon of hope appeared when Guilliman received a psychic message from the Eldari Farseer Eldrad Ulthran, now an ally of the Inari, laying out a series of landmarks for the Imperial fleet to follow to escape the warp rift. But when the much-diminished Crusade reached the starship graveyard marking the passage back to real space, they encountered another massive Chaos fleet, this time led by the Red Corsairs and the Lord of Change, Kairos Fateweaver. Chaos forces assaulted every void ship in the Imperial fleet, and Kairos ultimately defeated Guilliman by using his psychic powers to wrap the Primarch in chains crafted from his own guilt. Threatening the immobilized Primarch's life, the Greater Demon forced the rest of the Imperial fleet to surrender. The Terran Crusade found itself in dire straits, taken by Fateweaver's command to a Blackstone fortress hidden in the Maelstrom by the Red Corsairs, a secret gift from Abaddon the Despoiler. The Primarch and his remaining followers would have been trapped there for eternity, if not for intervention from an unexpected source. The Eldari Harlequins, led by the Shadowseer Silandri Veilwalker and Cypher, the mysterious fallen angel, who was sometimes enemy, sometimes ally to the Emperor's loyalists. In return for a promise to bring the fallen angel before the Golden Throne, Cypher freed the Primarch and his compatriots. With their starships lost and crews sacrificed to the ruinous powers, Veilwalker offered another path to Terra through the Webway Gate at the heart of the massive Xenos Star Fortress. The Terran Crusade passed through the Webway towards Terra, only to find the labyrinth dimension haunted by Magnus the Red and the forces of the Thousand Suns. Veilwalker explained there was a secret exit of the Webway on Luna, the moon of Terra, revealing that Magnus had been waiting for them. As soon as they opened the Webway exit in the Sol system, the Thousand Suns would rush through, unleashing a major chaos invasion right at Terra's doorstep, allowing Magnus to gain glory ahead of the Despoiler. But with aid from the Harlequins and other Imperial forces such as the Sisters of Silence and the Imperial Fists, Guilliman and his Terran Crusade survivors managed to overwhelm the Thousand Suns and cast Magnus back through the Webway portal, sealing it permanently to prevent any future threats to the throne world of the Imperium. At long last, Guilliman was escorted by the awed defenders of Terra to the Imperial Palace, where the survivors of the Celestinian and Terran Crusades finally parted ways. There, Guilliman met with his father, the Emperor of Mankind, for the first time in millennia. None know what was said between them, but when the Primarch emerged from the inner palace, he declared he was taking up the mantle of Lord Commander of the Imperium once more. Now the first among equals among the High Lords of Terra, as he had been after the Horus heresy, Guilliman promised the galaxy he would assemble the greatest fleet and armies seen since the Great Crusade to take the fight to chaos and revive the Emperor's lost dream of a better future for humanity. In the aftermath of the 13th Black Crusade, the Imperium was plunged into the nightmare darkness of the Noctis Aeterna by the opening of the Great Rift. Yet even this could not halt the avenging sun. Guilliman finally ordered Archmagos Belisarius Cawl to cease his 10,000 years of labour, marking the beginning of the Ultima founding and the awakening of the first waves of Primaris Space Marines. This decision was made just in time, for as the new generation of Space Marines emerged from beneath the Martian surface, a great host of demons descended upon Holy Terra. Unleashed by Khorne, the Blood God, these empiric abominations sought to claim the Emperor's skull. Opposed by Guilliman and the armies of Terra, they were ultimately destroyed at the Battle of Lion's Gate. Fleet Avenger and the coming of the Primaris Space Marines, while the resurrected Primarch Roboute Guilliman organized the Indomitus Crusade in the 999th year of 41st millennium, the Great Rift tore the galaxy asunder. Fearing for Ultramar, Guilliman sent much of the remaining task force of Ultramarines and their successor chapters, which had accompanied him to Terra during the Terran Crusade, to safeguard his realm. Among them were the first Primaris Ultramarines, as Archmagos Belisarius' call began to open his secret vaults. The small armada, commanded by Captain Cato Sicarius and dubbed Fleet Avenger, encountered warp storms unseen since the Age of Strife. With the fleet battered and split apart, Sicarius signalled for each void ship to find its own way back to Macragge, fearing many would not receive the message due to severe interference. Sicarius's own strike cruiser, the Emperor's Will, was still in the warp when the Astronomicon faded and went black, marking the onset of the Noctis Eterna. Amidst the psychic tidal waves cascading randomly across the galaxy, one last transmission was received from the Emperor's Will. The fragmentary message contained disturbing images with only one clear sentence: "They have breached the hull. They are here." Ultimately, half of Fleet Avenger reached Ultramar, bringing their precious cargo, but there was no sign of the Emperor's Will. In Sicarius's absence, Captain Sevastus Acheron assumed command of the Ultramarines' second company. Near the end of the 41st millennium, the Imperium lay broken in two. The Great Rift had split the galaxy, creating a seething belt of warp storms that spewed armies of unholy abominations into real space in unprecedented numbers. Time itself distorted under the influence of impossible forces, making the linear progression of war across the galaxy the work of madmen and fools. Warp travel became more hazardous than ever since the Age of Strife, leaving many thousands of Imperial worlds isolated and forced to rely on their own defences. The situation was worse beyond the Great Rift in the Imperium Nihilus, where the light of the Astronomicon was a distant, infrequent glimmer. Despite all this, the Ultramarines remained steadfast in their duty to defend the Imperium. Their duty had always been the protection of not only Ultramar, but the entire Emperor's realm, a responsibility they would not shirk. Many Imperial forces chose aggression over cowering behind defences. Crusading fleets struck out into the void with zeal. Some achieved great victories, but most were lost to nightmarish phenomena and tides of malefic foes. The Indomitus Crusade overshadowed all other undertakings. Launched from Terra and led by Robut Guilliman, this vast military endeavour echoed the Great Crusade of old. Spearheaded by newly founded Primaris Space Marines and supported by the Adeptus Custodes, Adepta Sororitas, Sisters of Silence, and battle groups of the Astra Militarum and Imperial Navy, the Indomitus Crusade fleets spread out from Terra to take the fight to the enemy. They brought not only Primaris Space Marine reinforcements for embattled chapters, but also the technology and Magos biologist adepts necessary for each chapter to create their own Primaris battle brothers. Robut Guilliman led one fleet, often accompanied by Belisarius Call's Arch Mechanicus flagship, Zar Quesitor, which carried thousands of Primaris Marines ready for battle. The Indomitus Crusade consisted of many fleets travelling in short, perilous warp jumps, spreading slowly across the Segmentum Solar and beyond, into the Segmentum Tempestus, Segmentum Pacificus and Segmentum Obscurus. Existing and newly founded Ultramarines and their successors accompanied many of these fleets. Some had fought from Terra, either as veterans of the Terran Crusade or as Primaris Space Marines. Others joined along the way, strike forces of Guilliman's Gene sons who had been investing war zones when the Great Rift opened. As the Indomitus Crusade pushed further across war-torn Imperial space, the Ultramarines and their successors fought on hundreds of disparate battlefronts against numerous terrible foes. A powerful prophetic vision saw Marneus Calgar lead a force of Ultramarines to Vigilus, a world at the mouth of the Nakmund Gauntlet, a rare stable channel through the Great Rift between the Imperium Sanctus and Imperium Nihilus. Chief Librarian Varro Tigurius of the Ultramarines foresaw that if this fortress world fell, the repercussions would be dire for the Emperor's realm. When Tigurius spoke prophecy, the wise listened. Calgar was en route to Venantis the Nine when Tigurius's astral projection brought the dire warning. Alerted, Calgar gathered a substantial Ultramarine strike force and changed course for Vigilus. The journey was achieved through the combined psychic guidance of the Ultramarines Librarius, costing several psychers their lives. Yet it was successful, and the Ultramarines arrived on Vigilus to take command from the compromised and self-interested ruling Aquilarian Council. Vigilus was beset by a great orc speedwar and an uprising of the cult of the Pauper Princes, a Genestealer cult infestation. It was a sprawling war across hundreds of fronts, and until Calgar's arrival, the fight had been fragmented by politicking and incompetence, bringing the Imperium to the brink of defeat. Calgar swiftly purged the council, retaining only those deemed trustworthy, and installed a new Senate. He sent vanguard Marines to neighboring worlds for intelligence and securing vital assets. Meanwhile, the Ultramarines rallied Vigilus's defenders and led the counterattack, arriving just in time as worse threats loomed. Unsettling phenomena were reported, with bat-winged figures haunting the tallest spires, abductions among the upper echelons, and the Great Rift darkening. The Emperor's tarot consistently revealed dire omens of a chaos invasion. This invasion came in the form of the Black Legion and Abaddon the Despoiler, determined to seize Vigilus and eliminate its ability to hold open the Nakmund Gauntlet with altered Blackstone deposits. Despite the challenges, the Imperium held firm, maintaining control of the planet. Though Xenos and Chaos factions remained among Vigilus's hive sprawls, the main conflict moved elsewhere in the galaxy. Despite the appalling destruction and loss of life, Vigilus took its first steps toward recovery after the War of Beasts. It remained a key resupply and communication route, with Imperial forces fighting to reclaim the Imperium Nihilus. One aspect of the Ultramarines Legion that endured the Second Founding was the strong relationship between its Astartes and the populations of the surrounding planets.